Welcome to the program. I'm Min San-hee with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the show.
Good to be back again, thanks.
A day prior to the November 16th state-administered College Scholastic Ability Test, an earthquake struck Korea's southeastern coastal region. The city of Pohang sustained significant infrastructure damage, leaving many displaced and injured, while some 590,000 test takers saw their test date postponed by a week. In this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a look at the seismic shock and more.
On November 15th at 2:29 p.m., an earthquake occurred in Korea's southeastern city of Pohang. The Pohang earthquake recorded a magnitude of 5.4, Korea's second largest earthquake on record. Many damages were reported in Pohang following the earthquake. Cracks were found in numerous buildings, outer walls collapsed, and parked cars were damaged. The Pohang earthquake forced more than 1,000 people out of their homes, and the number of damaged buildings reached 9,000. The government meanwhile responded quickly to the earthquake. On November 19th, the government decided to provide rental properties to those left homeless with a waiver on deposit and a 50% reduction in rent. For the time being, 10-cent cubicles were installed for the victims in the earthquake shelter in consideration of the victims' privacy. 5 days after the Pohang earthquake, the government designated Pohang as a special disaster zone. At the same time, it pledged to take follow-up measures for the earthquake-affected residents.
당장은 피해 복구와 차질 없는 수능 실시가 최우선입니다. 긴급한 일이 끝나면 안전과 재난에 대한 대비를 전면적으로 점검하겠습니다.
The strong earthquake occurred one day before the College Scholastic Ability Test, and students in Pohang were thrown into chaos. Out of the 14 schools in Pohang which were designated as test sites, some were found to be damaged, making it impossible to guarantee the safety of the test takers. In the end, the government decided to postpone the examination for the safety of the students and to ensure the fairness of the exam. The Pohang earthquake even led to the postponing of a major college entrance exam. We look forward to the government's extensive follow-up measures to prevent further damage and to ease public anxiety.
Fred, the government's response to the disaster here in Korea, in Pohang, was quite swift. So far it's been efficient, and the public has been praising the government for its efforts to improve sanitary and privacy concerns at a temporary shelter at an indoor gym. What are your thoughts on the government's actions so far?
I mean, the thing that surprised me the most is actually, like everybody, I received a message on my phone about the earthquake before I could feel the tremor, because we received the message, and a couple of seconds after, the tremor could be felt in Seoul, which was actually impressive. I don't know in Japan if that's normal, but for me to receive the text before feeling the earthquake was
right, because the text was sent, they were received 23 seconds after the first earthquake in Pohang.
It was really, really fast, and it seemed that the government did a good job, yes.
Did you receive the message as well,
Yes,
Frank?
I did receive the message.
But it was in Korean?
Yes, it was in Korean. But again, it comes through this alert system. You know it's some type of emergency, and I think that a message system like that really is a remarkable sort of breakthrough that I think can transfer into other national emergencies and be really quite effective.
Right. Coach, in your opinion, the government's response, how would you evaluate it?
I think so far it's okay, and President Moon went to the site a week after earthquake, and it was I think it was a good decision, because the top leader goes to the site too early, then it might disturb the evacuating or rescuing effort. So a week after is right timing, and what is the most important thing for top leaders to make is formulate mid and long-term plan to help disaster victims. So I think we will see what will come out from his visit to the site.
Yeah, I agree with Koichi. I think if President Moon had gone right away, it would distract from relief efforts and from the issues involved with what's going on, and also maybe appear as kind of media grandstanding. And I don't think that's something that he wanted to appear to be doing. I think it was very effective that he wait a week and then go down and encourage relief efforts and provide a little bit of a boost to the local population, which he seems to have done.
Mm-hmm. Fred, what more can the government do to better address some of the hardships faced by the victims in Pohang?
I mean, for me, I think for what the government did in terms of providing shelter, assistance, I think the answer so far, from what I can read, was really good. Now, I think in the long term, the issue is to provide, not enough buildings seems to be quake-proof in Korea. I read some reports saying that in Seoul, for example, only 3 of 10 buildings could sustain a strong earthquake, which is a bit worrying. So maybe now it's time, since we see more and more earthquakes in Korea, maybe the government should start to look into this and maybe set up some standards and guidelines for the future constructions and to ensure that all buildings are still safe.
Yes, I was surprised to read some of I think the similar reports probably that Fred read, where some said only 26% of certain types of buildings were quake-proof, up to something like 65% of buildings were quake-proof, and I think that's definitely an issue as well.
Right, because previously we had believed that Korea was an earthquake-safe zone.
Exactly.
But the reality right now is quite different. Now, the state-administered Scholastic Ability Test was postponed just 12 hours prior to its start. Do you believe that this postponement was inevitable, Koichi?
I think so, because some of the venue was affected by the earthquake, so there was no choice, I guess.
Do you think the Japanese government would have taken a similar course of action?
If the venue has some problem, I think so.
Right. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm sure that must have been very stressful for all the students who suddenly they have to study one more week. Maybe they had planned to take some holidays after the tsunami. But I think it's fair for the people in the Pohang region, yes.
And I read some department stores had to postpone their special after-test sales for another week too. So hopefully we won't delay Christmas a week because of the test.
Hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed. But yes, the decision to postpone the test set off a domino effect. Yeah. You even had the case where the people who had actually prepared the examinations themselves, they could not leave the area because in fears that you might give questions or you might not knowingly give out a question. So they were forced to stay on where they were for about a week more, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I knew somebody that wrote part of some questions for the English language part of the test, and they actually quarantine the people that write the test because they don't, again, want them to leak out information.
For a full week.
Well, they had to. I guess they had to extend it for a week because
and you have no access to your mobile.
Oh my God!
Right, no contact with those outside. I see. The Pohang earthquake also triggered another talk of some other issues as well. This involves pets. Now, pet owners were left clueless about how to deal with the dilemma of whether or not they should take their pets with them. There were others who were complaining that you can't bring pets into a shelter because it's human life first. But for pet owners, their pets are part of their families as well. What are your thoughts on this, Koichi?
Well, Japanese government has some guideline for that. So beforehand, you should prepare for the disaster so that your pet has to go to train them to go into the cage or something like that. That's a guideline, and there is always a problem because victims need pets for their psychological reason. They are part of family. But this evacuation shelter, if you go there, then there are other people that don't like pets, or some people have some allergy with cat or dog. So this is really difficult problem.
It is a difficult dilemma. What are your thoughts on it, Fred?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was wondering how Japan dealt with that issue. For me, I mean, I'm not a pet person, but I really understand that some people, their pet is really important, so I don't see any reason why they should leave their dog or their cat at home. So I hope people are tolerant and accept that for some people pets are very important. And having some guidelines, as you said, or maybe teach the pet to go into his cage, or maybe in the shelter to have some area, maybe a small room for the people with pet, maybe that would be good.
Yeah, I agree with you. Having some area in the shelter for people that have pets might be good to separate the pets from people that don't have pets or have allergies. And I wouldn't want to see certainly government resources devoted to caring for people's pets ahead of caring for any people that were suffering in some way.
Right. Now, despite the current relief efforts, there is a lot of work ahead to be done, especially in the city of Pohang, given the state of the buildings. With that in mind, what do you think are the immediate challenges that the government needs to think of in the long-term process, Koichi?
I think the biggest challenge is building the quake-proof, provide more quake-proof building, and what to do with those buildings which not completely collapse, but there is a danger of collapsing if another similar earthquake comes. So that is the biggest challenge, I think.
For me, my biggest concern is the nuclear issue. There is a lot of nuclear power plants in the region. Actually, there is a huge concentration of power plants in the southeast of South Korea. And there is a Kori nuclear power plant, there is a Wolsong. And actually, the Pohang, it's not very far from the epicenter of the earthquake. And after I learned about the news of the earthquake, the second news I was really waiting for is, what about the nuclear power plant over there? So I think that's a big issue because it seems that there is more earthquake than was anticipated. So I think the government should, as soon as possible, start maybe a safety reassessment, a very thorough safety reassessment of all the power plants in the region to check whether they are safe, because the consequences could be huge. Because not only a lot of nuclear power plants are concentrated in the same region, but a lot of people are living in the same region too. So that could be potentially very dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with Fred. Evaluating the damage to the buildings, not just the nuclear power plants, but other buildings in the region that have been affected by the quake. And then already I read about the National Assembly now looking at this issue and passing some new legislation about the building codes for construction in South Korea and addressing that more thoroughly and implementing regulations. South Korea doesn't have a great record when it comes to, corruption in the construction industry. There have been a couple of collapses of buildings in South Korea that weren't related even to earthquakes. So I think it's important to address this on a regulatory level moving forward as well.
Right. Well, I guess, Fred, like you mentioned, the seismic shock in Pohang has triggered much concern over a number of issues, including the lack of seismic design in many of the country's infrastructure and the presence of nuclear power plants. We have details in our second report.
The Pohang earthquake left both the citizens of Pohang and the people of Korea shocked and frightened. The recent earthquake has shattered the belief that Korea is an earthquake-safe zone, and at the same time it has made it clear that current earthquake measures are insufficient. The seismic design of the buildings has been pointed out as the most insufficient factor in terms of earthquake preparedness. Seismic design is the durability of a structure to withstand earthquakes. In addition, the earthquake resistance rate refers to the proportion of facilities with earthquake-proof design or earthquake-proof reinforcement. The problem is, only 1 out of 5, or precisely 20.6% of the residential buildings were earthquake-proof. Public facilities, including schools, roads and railways, did not exceed the 50% mark, sitting at 43.7%. This stands in sharp contrast to Japan, where 80% of the buildings in the nation are earthquake-resistant, according to numbers from 2013. Meanwhile, President Moon Jae-in ordered for the preparation of measures to strengthen seismic resistance at a cabinet meeting following the Pohang earthquake.
우선 지진에 취약한 학교 시설, 그리고 다중이용 시설과 지진 발생 시 국민들의 불안이 큰 원전 시설, 또 석유화학 단지 등부터 종합적인 실태 점검을 통해 꼼꼼하고 실효성 있는 내진 보강 대책을 마련해 주기 바랍니다.
It was also noted that the earthquake shelter was poorly operated and that earthquake education was not being properly carried out. The reason for the lack of preparedness is the public's numbness to safety hazards which still prevail in Korea. Meanwhile, the dispute over nuclear power came to light again after the Pohang earthquake. The fact that the Korean peninsula is not an earthquake-safe zone and that a major earthquake has occurred in an area with nuclear power plants strengthened the voice of those opposed to nuclear power. The ruling party, which opposes nuclear power plants, expressed its concern over the fact that earthquakes have occurred in areas with nuclear power plants such as Gyeongju and Pohang.
경주에 이어서 원전 일진 지역에서 지진이 일어난 만큼 원전 안전 관리에 대한 국민들의 우려가 매우 큽니다. 정부, 범정부 차원으로 신속하게 관리해 나갈 수 있도록 해야겠습니다.
However, opposition parties in favor of the nuclear power plants insisted that the reactors could resist earthquakes.
참상까지도 대비를 해서 원전 설계를 하고 원전 안전도가 세계 1위인데 또 좌파들이 그런 괴담을 퍼뜨리는 것은
The Pohang earthquake has triggered controversy over safety numbness and nuclear power plants. We hope that this recent earthquake will provide an opportunity to think about what must be done for a safer future.
Now, in your opinion, do you believe that Korea has become insensitive to safety? Like, there are some who believe that we make light of potentially dangerous situations. Frank, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I do think there is a safety issue here in South Korea. I mean, we look back just 3 years to the Sewol accident, and I think there might be a sort of unrelated influence to this, that being the relationship with North Korea. South Korea lives with this sort of cloud of war hanging over the Korean peninsula, and it kind of, because people have to go on with their daily lives, they have to sort of subsume, you know, or just suppress that concern about, you know, ultimate danger being war. And so other safety concerns may be also suppressed.
What about you, Fred? Do you share Frank's thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Frank. I don't know who described South Korea as a risk-tolerant society, and I think it's true, and I think North Korea probably has a role in this, the fact that there is a threat hanging over the people for so many years. But I want to be a bit optimist, and I feel like after the Sewol tragedy, the Sewol ferry tragedy, I think there is people understand that this issue needs to be addressed. So it might take some time. I mean, as always, it's always difficult to move on the legislative level, but I really want to believe that people will start to understand that it's important to address this issue.
Now, like Fred mentioned earlier, Koichi, the Pohang earthquake has prompted fears over the safety of nuclear power plants, many of which are clustered in the southeastern region of the country. Some are now calling for a complete shutdown as well. Do you believe that this should be the case? We should shut them down?
No. On the whole, I support the idea of gradually breaking with a nuclear power plant. But I still believe that most of the power plant itself is very solidly quake-proof building, and even in the Fukushima case, it was okay with the earthquake itself, but it was hit by tsunami, then there was a problem. So we have to be careful, cost and effect.
Most of the nuclear reactors here are believed to be built to sustain an earthquake of 6.5. Does this make them safe, do you think, Frank?
I don't know. I don't like the idea of nuclear power plants being built to a certain level, and then if there's an earthquake over that level, suddenly they're unsafe, because over a certain number of, I don't know, centuries, they, you know, estimate that there will be, you know, higher level earthquakes. I do think that nuclear energy sometimes is misrepresented in the media. While it does represent a tremendous risk, if we look overall at some of the consequences of the energy that is being created to replace what would be lost with nuclear energy, you're looking at a large number of, yes, deaths. If we consider that we're going to increase the amount of coal that we use to replace nuclear energy, that is going to cost lives in the number of people that are going to die prematurely because of the pollution that will be released into the atmosphere. And that's not really part of this debate. There's a lot of fear around nuclear energy. But again, we have to look at how we're going to replace this. One of the things that is almost never talked about is that we need to change the way that we behave, our energy consumption. So ideas like, a private car in urban centers need to be challenged, and we need to think of ways to change our lifestyles that have a much smaller energy footprint than we have right now, if we're going to do things like shut down nuclear power plants and shut down coal power plants.
Yeah, in my case, after actually visiting Fukushima area and interviewing a lot of people who had to flee their home forever, some of them will, maybe they will never be able to come back. That really made me strongly anti-nuclear. I didn't have so much of a strong opinion before, but after, I really think maybe we shouldn't stop the nuclear power plant now, but we should maybe stop constructing new ones. And you say, I don't say we should use coal instead. I know that coal kills a lot of people because of the pollution, but all the nuclear energy costs a lot of money. And dismantle a nuclear power plant, nuclear reactor costs a lot of money. And if all this money was used in research and development of clean and sustainable and renewable energies, I do think that, and if we change our behavior, if we consume less, if we use less air conditioning, less heating system, I think we could find a way to live without nuclear energy, and I think that would make everyone safer.
Koichi, Japan is well known for its seismic design and for its safety protocols related to earthquake emergencies. What is in that manual?
The most famous manual is provided by Tokyo Metropolitan Government called Tokyo Bosai, which means preparation for disaster. It includes that what kind of goods you need to prepare before the earthquake, like food, what kind of food or water, how much water, according to these, all the experience of hit by earthquake.
That brings up an interesting news item that came up when we were sort of on the brink of war once again with North Korea, was this viral YouTube video of what you need to have in your go bag to prepare if there was going to be a war with North Korea. And you just describing this, I think really in South Korea, people aren't so prepared for national emergencies as they could be. We don't have a go bag for my family, a package that we're going to take if we have to leave our house in the case of an emergency. And I think maybe South Koreans are a little bit ill prepared for some type of national emergency like this.
I see. Right, well, this will probably be our final question, but what are some measures that the government can take now to ensure a safe environment for the public in the case of another earthquake in the future? We'll start with you, Koichi.
Strengthen regulation for the building, quake-proof building, and also people's way of finding houses should change, because in Japan, that is the first thing to check when we buy apartment or house, how much quake-proof this building has, and what kind of structure, underground structure is safe or not. So it's really first thing to check for us.
I see. Fred, what do you think?
That's interesting. I do think now things, as Koichi said, regulation has to change. And, buildings in Korea are usually built for a short period of time. In my neighborhood, buildings are built and destroyed and new ones are built. And maybe it would be time now to build more long-term with good quake-proof technologies, since it seems that there is more and more quakes in Korea.
Right, definitely. Frank?
Well, I think that the South Korean government now, from what I've read, they're already going to be working on this with some legislation. But, I think maybe there needs to be a public awareness campaign. Obviously, the three of us need to put together our go bags. And maybe if there was a little bit of promotion through domestic media here in South Korea for South Koreans to do what they can to prepare for any, potential natural disaster.
Well, findings show the frequency of tremors here in Korea has been on the rise. In the 1980s, there were less than 20 such incidents. In the 1990s, there were between 40 and 50. But by 2016, there were 252. Now, this reality clearly shows that it is time for us to devise tangible and even stringent safety guidelines to ensure the protection of the public in the case of future earthquakes. Thank you for watching.